Hey, been a while since the last episode. Anyways, welcome back to Math and Tea, the show where we talk math and drink tea. I'm your host, Professor Joseph Vandehei. I want to finish off all those book reviews I was doing this summer, and the last one is a personal favorite. It's not even a math book. Not really, although there's lots of math in it. The book is Godel, Escher, Bach, An Eternal Golden Braid by Douglas Hofstadter. I like this book. I really like this book, and lots of other people like it too. I mean, it won a Pulitzer, for Pete's sake. I really like this book. But enough gushing about it. Let's talk about what's actually inside it. This is actually kind of a tough book to describe in some ways, because it's about so many different things, all weaving together and interlocking. But if I had to boil it down to just one thing, it's a book about consciousness. It's a book about the way our minds actually work. But I'm talking about the book here because there is a lot of math that's actually in it. Hofstadter's concept of consciousness relies in a key way on the notion of a self-referential loop. For example, this statement has 5 words. To help us understand what a self-referential loop is really capable of, which is a surprising amount, Hofstadter employs analogy, looking at other kinds of self-referential loops, the loops in the art of M.C. Escher, or the fugues and themes in Bach, and most important of all, to the self-referential statements in the mathematical work of Godel. Once we understand how the loops work in art and in music, then we can understand how they work in math and programming, and from there we can use it to help us understand Hofstadter's notion of consciousness. So, to Hofstadter, our brains are symbol processing machines. We have symbols for gray, we have symbols for computers, we have symbols for that silly guy. But most important of all, our brains are so robust, so complicated, that they have formed a symbol for themselves. That is consciousness, that's identity, that's a self-referential loop of the brain to itself. But even all of that is a pretty poor description of what this book is actually like. It's also an amazing work of art. I mean, a metaphorical fugue on minds and machines in the spirit of Lewis Carroll. That's right, if you liked Alice in Wonderland, you'll love this book. So in between chapters where he's talking about all of these heady concepts, he has these dialogues between characters like Achilles and Tortoise, who still reference the concepts, but they do so obliquely and in a more fable-like setting. And the result is rather magical. Well, let me just describe one chapter so you get the impression of what's going on. We start with a dialogue called Little Harmonic Labyrinth, named after an organ piece believed to be written by Bach. It involves Achilles and Tortoise visiting stories within stories within stories. It involves pushing potions to jump down into a layer of story, and then popping tonics to jump out of a layer of story. It involves a genie being asked to grant a meta-wish, so they have to summon a meta-genie to grant the meta-wish, but it turns out it's not actually a meta-wish, it's higher than that, so the meta-genie has to summon a meta-meta-genie who can grant a meta-meta-wish, but it's not even at that. Okay, you get the point. It involves a trip to the musical labyrinth of the evil major tour. Because it's in a major key, not a minor key, so it wouldn't be a minor tour. Okay, I'm over-explaining it. It just works better when you read it than when you say it aloud. And all of this leads to a discussion of recursion. Recursion in art, recursion in music, recursion in math and programming, even a trip to physics to talk about recursion in Feynman diagrams. And all of it is subtly connected to each other and to the misadventures of Achilles and Tortoise that we just finished reading. It's just kind of magical how it all works. And even that is a terrible description of this book. Okay, how do I put this? When you read a good book, when you read a book that has an impact on you, it tends to be because it changes the way you see the world. When I read Cathy O'Neill's Weapons of Math Destruction, it changed the way I look at the world. It changed the way I look at every algorithm that is out there. But when you read a really great book, it changes the way you see everything. And that's what this book did for me. I see everything differently because of this book. Let me put it one other way. I had to read this book for class in high school. Yes, the whole thing. And I'm gushing over it, over a decade later. It's just a good book. That said, I won't claim this book isn't without its faults. For starters, it's big again. And, I've got Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell on my shelf, and this is a smaller book. by a tiny amount. Second, well, sometimes Hofstadter gets so lost in the beauty of words and art that you just get plain lost in the book and lose track of what the argument actually is. As such, years later, Hofstadter wrote a second book, I Am a Strange Loop, which covers basically the same concepts but in a more standard nonfiction book format. So, if this sounds like an interesting concept, but you want the give it to me straight version, then just try this book. But honestly, this one's just better. Anyways, that's all for the reviews, and about time too, because I'm out of tea again. Bye!